place, that going to a place is a fantastic experience. That if you can go, I would recommend it. But it's kind of interesting. Peter, can't think of his name. Sloterdijk, Peter Sloterdijk. In one of his books, which is the Welt idea. What's it? Let's see, Peter Sloterdijk. In one of his books, where he talks about the world sphere, it's in German. It's the Welt. We even use it a lot. Not Weltgeist, but in any case, he brought up this absolutely fascinating question about why, if you think about it, who goes on tours, world tours, or visits other cities, or even goes on a walk around town? It actually occurred at a very specific time. Like the French began to go for walks. You know, that was like a new thing. But now I know we have tourists from like Japan, China, Korea. We have tourists now from all over the place. But where did it get? It started really with Western Europeans traveling other places. It's kind of interesting. He talks about how once we realized we've got this globe, and the globe therefore had all these spots that we didn't know what was there. It had to be there. There had to be something there, but we didn't know what it was. So we end up with these explorers, Columbus, and all these other explorers that Europeans wanted to go and find out what was out there. Obviously, they weren't the first to do that, and so on. But nonetheless, they got this business of wanting to make sure they found what was in every single place on this globe. It was like they wanted to fill it all in. We've got all this empty space, and so that started, and we end up, of course, eventually with people wanting to physically go to all of those places. And you think this is kind of a program that got its start for a particular reason, but then it kind of spread, and you got version 2.0 and 4.6 and 7.2, and eventually you get all these people that want to buy an RV and have every state on the on the side, that they visited it, and you think that's not something that used to be. You don't think of nomads as thinking to themselves, gee, I want to find out what things are like in France. In a sense, it became kind of a European interest that we still have. And so when you think about the joy of going to all these places, part of it is that we're satisfying this urge to see every place in the world that's out there. Not everybody does that. I don't have have tourists from, you know, Greenland, you know, coming to visit. You know, I don't think so.
I think there's two different kinds of people, you know, there's those who feel like they do have the itch to go everywhere all the time. And, you know, it's kind of like, I want to see as many places I can before I die. And then there are some who were perfectly content in their one small little town and don't even care to ever leave it.
So a lot of square inches in Eagle River I haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
I have to admit, with Google Earth, I could zoom up to the top of the mountains and look down. I don't have to.
Hike it.
Those are hard to walk up. Really hard. Okay. Something I neglected to do, pretty easy, I suppose, is, oh, here. So Amy, if we actually look at her article, did I turn that on?
Yes.
It is, okay. So, looking at the first page, which is 628, I have an asterisk at the first paragraph. What sort of thing is a work of art? These are all questions regarding the ontology of the work of art. That's what, you know, ontology is on what there is, or the study of what there is. A lot of these pieces that she talks about, like Liz Magore's Time and Mrs. Tiber, and so on, I recommend, as you're reading an article like this, look those up. If you plug those into Google, the art will be there for you to see. You'll see that picture, so you'll know what it is. Right? That's a real handy thing that you could. And so she doesn't need pictures in the article. You could just use Google, and there it is, and you can see what she's talking about. And some of the pieces she talks about are like jars of canned food on a shelf. And you think, okay, so that's her art. Well, you know, that's not going to last for years. Eventually, all those jars are going to rot. You know, the food will rot, and your wife won't let you eat it, right? You know, some of the food, you know, the viewer eats. So how long is that going to last, right? Messed up beds. You know, this is my bed, you know, when I woke up this morning. And it's sitting there on a floor in a museum. Like, you know, you're thinking, gee, you know, why does her bed rate compared to, you know, my bed, which my wife makes right away, you know, so it wouldn't look like that, you know. You know, piles in the corner, you know, FedEx large box, you know, how is that art, you know, is it? And of course you can look on Google and see, you can actually see, there's a picture on Google of a FedEx box with dents in it, and that is the artwork of Walid Beshti. The purpose of this paper, she says, is to discuss an interesting consequence that falls out of that view, namely, that there's no set answer to the question of the ontological status of a work of art, which you quoted earlier. So look up the pictures. Fire may destroy a painting, but not a symphony. What makes it possible to introduce works of art of ontologically new kinds, like tilt brush? That's absolutely art. I knew it as soon as I saw it. It was totally invented. How does it get shared? You know, how, if you make something yourself, how do you make money from it, or share it with other people? Very few people that I know have the devices here in Anchorage, even though they're readily available. So it's not like, you know, like there's online clubs and so on. Not very many people I know have them. Unfamiliar kinds of art, trigger happy, Foucault's essay, What is an Author? Technosphere, she mentions lots of ready-mades, the discussion again of seemingly stupid things. Remember how Sir Roger Scruton criticized those as kitsch and so on. He called it urinal. I say urinal. I don't know how you would pronounce it, etc. By the way, I wonder how does Facebook's copyright? If you upload pictures, those are your pictures, right? But now Facebook also has access to them and can use them for things, as I understand it. Yes? I believe so. Even pictures of you, right? Mentioned one person in particular. When I got an email saying that she was going to be attending the class, I looked you up and discovered, whoa, look at all, this person is in everything. It was fantastic. Did you know you have that footprint on the web?
Yeah.
Okay. It's kind of surprising when you look and you see all the different things they're involved in. And of course, the one thing I'm hoping to avoid is my obituary. That'll eventually be on there.
Yeah, I don't want mine.
I don't want to be reading that. That's,
Most people don't have
Mark Twain famously got to surprisingly read his and had to write an article to the papers. How did he say it? The news of my unfortunate demise is early or whatever.
Greatly exaggerated.
Greatly exaggerated. That's hilarious. Okay. So, I don't know. Any questions on Amy Thompson, the article, the issue? Did I make it interesting or was it boring all the way through? But we can move on to Sartre, who obviously is famous but dead, but he's still famous, obviously. I just read an article the other day. One of the pages I go to, it automatically so often that I don't remember what it's called. Art and something. There it is. There it is. Okay. I am already. So. But this is a free website that I learned about many years ago thanks to a friend, Dr. Stephen Haycox, who told me I should read this every day. Every day they add a selection of articles to it. It's from the Chronicle of Higher Education. Should say that there's some from the Chronicle of Higher Education. So they have readers that read all sorts of sources, and every day they pick their favorite articles and post them here. And so you could read, as you click on the article, you'll see they come from all different sources, and they're very interesting articles. So I highly recommend bookmarking this if you're into current.
How many people can post their articles? Like anybody who decides?
Oh, I don't know anyone that can except for the board of the Chronicle of Education that posts the articles.
Okay.
But what I find interesting is there's often a lot of articles that are of philosophical import, so I like watching those. This particular article is the article I meant that I read just the other day. Sartre's not married spouse. I don't know what they had a long relationship. It wasn't traditional because they never married, and they didn't have any children. But Simone de Beauvoir was his significant other. Although this article points out that she he had relationships with lots of other women, and she didn't mind. Well, she did, I guess, but she didn't complain. But so that was just in literary review. So this is a new book on their relationship, and it's titled Beyond the Second Sex. I haven't read it yet, but there it is. But this particular article, a couple things keep in mind. He uses the concept of a priori. Amy used that, and I meant to mention it. A priori is just Latin for before. So if you think a priori, this is prior to, basically, right? And there's usually an opposite traditional what's the phrase, a posteriori. I don't know if I've mentioned that, and that means after, right? Posterior, if you just think of it that way. But they tend to be very specific in use philosophically. So a priori are situations or things that are available to you, say, in your memory, knowledge that you have prior to an experience. So I have all this stuff that I already know, and then I have experiences, and it's kind of, I'm looking at all that experience through the filter of the a priori, what's already in my mind. But once I have an experience, now I've got new things that I'm adding to that collection, and those experiences at that moment are now a posteriori, because I just had that experience, so it's posterior to my having that experience. But of course, as time goes on, now that becomes part of my a priori, right? Because I keep adding that collection of stuff that enables me to see things. So when they talk about a priori, he does that a couple of times here. Is there an a priori to our decisions and things of that sort? So this is Condemned to be Free. Jean-Paul Sartre is an existentialist. And when we think, well, where did existentialism get its start? We might think, gosh, it's not really significantly new. I might say it's a relatively new word for an old way of thinking. But the original existentialist, if you look it up, is Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher from Copenhagen. And I don't know why, because his teacher was Friedrich Schelling, who literally called his philosophy existence philosophy, which is existentialism, I think, just in German. But so Søren Kierkegaard is considered the first existentialist. Perhaps because he spent so much writing about his solipsistic problems being alive, basically. Sartre was actually a student of Husserl, Edmund Husserl, who was famous for phenomenology, which is the study of phenomena, and not spooky phenomena, but that was at the time what they meant by all of our experience. What David Chalmers was talking about when you're getting the stream of consciousness, all of the stuff that's entering in your stream of consciousness is your phenomena that you're experiencing, right? Phene means a lamp, right? And so in a sense, phenomena is what you see as you walk around with a lamp, say in the dark. So you can only see what you shine your light on, so to speak. So as a metaphor, phenomena is kind of, I can only see what I look at, basically, right? All that sort of thing. So Husserl and Heidegger is another, so when you think that the relationship that Sartre has with Husserl and with Heidegger, Heidegger was also a colleague of Husserl. Husserl was Jewish, and so when the Nazis came to power, Heidegger was a Nazi, joined the National Socialist Party, right? And in fact became like the head academic in Freiburg, and fired or retired Husserl. Kind of ambiguous exactly what happened. And everybody thinks the worst for Heidegger, because the reason Husserl ended up no longer working at the university was most likely because he was Jewish, and the Nazis didn't want Jewish academics anymore. And Heidegger, who owed so much to Husserl and then nonetheless fired him and kind of ruined the rest of his life by doing that, is considered to be a mean ogre Nazi kind of guy for doing that, right? So you can see that kind of interesting relationship. Sartre was studying in Germany, but of course is French, and ends up being in the French resistance. So if you're reading through this and he mentions the resistance business, I noticed it didn't say what resistance. So if you're not familiar with what's going on, this is during the Nazi occupation of France. Sartre was in the resistance and was captured and imprisoned. So that's when he meets the Jesuit, right, in the article, when he was in prison, right? By the way, he also wrote while he was in prison, and they even let him produce a play, The Frogs, I believe, which was a satire on the Nazis. And that's really kind of interesting because the Nazi censors allowed it to be performed, which makes me think that some of them were intellectuals enough that they thought, ha, this is making fun of Hitler but they let it happen, so it's like, whoa, there were some Nazis that probably weren't quite so, whatever. What else? Okay, so looking at the article, the bottom of the first column, I've underlined those who appeal to the wisdom of the people, which is a sad wisdom, find ours sadder still. So a lot of folks think of existentialism as a sad philosophy. I do myself, actually. When I was a philosophy major, I think I mentioned how I was absolutely thrilled with Hegel, how he solved all sorts of problems for me. But then I started reading about contemporary science and discovered that, as Daniel Dennett points out, that our human body is made up of a whole bunch of little robots, none of which are free. And yet we're the ones that manipulate our little robots and move our body and think with all of our little robots and everything. And yet we think of ourselves as free, but we're not, in a sense, because we're totally determined by physical nature, right? So everything I do, in a sense, is a result of my prior experiences, my training. Even contemporaries like Steven Pinker point out and argue about when you do brain scans of people that are making a decision, you could see the decision form, I suppose, somehow in the brain. And then the person realizes, aha, I've decided to buy that bed. Right? So in a sense, the brain scan seems to indicate you think that you picked that bed, but actually your body picked that bed before you even were aware that you picked it. You heard this dilemma before, right? You know, it's a nanosecond, which to me doesn't sound like a whole lot, but nonetheless, if they're looking at it and they say, I'm buying that bed, I'm buying that bed, it sounds like there's some process at work that is doing everything, and I'm kind of supervening on top of it, like I'm riding the horse. The horse is going where it wants to go, and I'm riding on the horse and thinking I'm the one that's driving the horse. And that's kind of the way a lot of people are looking at what we think of ourselves, is that I'm the one that's making this decision. But you know, in a way, science is kind of arguing that no, your body is doing all this stuff on its own. You just think you're in charge of it. Isn't that mean to do to us, right? Well, that was very depressing, finding that out and learning all the things that basically are subliminal and I'm not even aware of, but will pretty much decide for me whether I'm going to eat pickles or not, right? All that kind of thing. And so that was very depressing to realize that I had no free will. I have no free agency whatsoever. And then I read Sartre. And he, in his book, Being and Nothingness, it's kind of interesting when you look at Heidegger's main book was Being and Time. That's, in a sense, a response to Hegel's concept of being in his logic, right? But Heidegger gives it the title Being and Time. Then Sartre gives his book Being and Nothingness. And where does the nothingness come in? Well, being is everything. And the human being, which Heidegger calls Dasein, right? Which literally means being there. Because you're the focus for yourself of everything. So you're there. Dasein, right? It's kind of an official word now, but what Heidegger was doing was just saying da, which means there, sein, being, right? And putting the two of them together. Philosophers invent a whole lot of new words, right? Well, for Sartre, what does it mean for me to be there, right? I have an awareness of myself. So there's two sides of my consciousness. My in itself, which is experiencing everything, and my for itself, which is what I think of as me. In French, that's the en soi and the pour soi. In German, the an sich and the für sich, right? So there's a whole bunch of folks that are all talking about this, right? But Sartre's version of it, you know, the en soi, the in itself, is the real me, so to speak. But the thing is, when I think of me, I think of myself as all of the concepts that I have that I think of as me. You know, Bill Jamison, 206-42825. I'll tell my whole social security number on the camera, right? You know, short, ugly guy, sort of retired, yay, 47 years married, that's, all those things, that's me. All these concepts I think of as me. So if somebody asks, who are you? I'm this. And he points out that actually, I am not any of that. Those are just conceptual schemas I have in my mind that I think of as me, right? But the real me, of course, is the in itself that's having the experience. The trouble is, I can't experience the in itself. Because that's like you looking at the mirror and saying, well, I want to see what I look like from the mirror's point of view. That's not going to work, right? Because you can't swap yourself with the mirror. You're always the in itself looking at the for itself in the mirror, right? It's for, yes, Douglas.
Is this part of where he's talking about the existence preceding the essence? Or is that a whole different concept?
That follows from it. So I exist as a human being as this relationship. Because if I'm conscious, I think of I am having experiences, but what is it that I think of as me? It's all these concepts that I've learned from my peers. My parents called me Billy, etc. You know, all that stuff. I think of that's me, but it isn't. It's the concepts I have of myself, not the real me.
Like worldview?
Well, so he's creating this. Well, he's not the only one. I mean, there's others that do the same thing. So you think of, this is the self-reflecting aspect of the human being, is that I think of myself. What I'm thinking of as myself is my mental conceptions that I think of as me. Yes, you had a question.
Yeah, so you're saying that you aren't any of your experiences?
Well,
Or like, I don't know, the analogy that I think of is like I'm the cart on the roller coaster. And the roller coaster is like life. And I experience the roller coaster, but I'm still a cart.
yeah, you're in the cart, but you're experiencing, right. But, so when we think of it this way, we think of the real you as not all of your experiences, but the guy that's sitting in the cart.
I don't know if I agree with that.
You think of yourself as all the experiences.
No, you said how you think of me.
Oh, how would I think of you?
Well, I thought that's what you said.
He's totally self-centered, I think. So he's describing all of this from the first person experience. So as David Chalmers even just said, he says, I'm having this conscious experience of you, the audience. I don't even know if you're conscious. That's the same, we can say the same thing, how do I even know you're there, right? This could be a dream that I'm having, and then I wake up and you're all gone, right? There's plenty of philosophers even before this that already, played with that. David Hume famously, well, you're gone. Oh, you're back. Seems dumb, but he was very persuasive. Tim.
So when you mention the in itself, innate, I-N-N-A-T-E, innate, or in it, I-N-I-T?
In, okay, so it's spelled in itself. And we could even just look it up as en soi. There you can see.
There's only a billion results.
Really?
Itself. So, would, going off of what Doug mentioned here, would en soi and for soi, both concepts exist nested within existence, which precedes essence, or is for soi not part of existence, since it is not technically the same?
Well, the way it works out best is that the whole you is both the in itself and the for itself.
And those are both within existence, but
Right.
they're not yet essence, because essence is created throughout.
You're creating it. You're creating it as you go. Now, but here's what's really neat about this. That Sartre, in Being in Nothingness, points out that what is the gap between the in itself and the for itself. Right? There's a gap between that. Because I am what I am not. And I am not what I am. In other words, I think of myself as this for itself, but that's not me. So I am what I am not, but I am not what I am, because I'm always conceiving. I think that's how it works. It was a neat line, but at the same time you wonder, what the heck does he mean, right? Right? But so there's this constant relationship. So I might want to be the best teacher, so I look up, how to be a best teacher. I do things and everything, and I think I'm being exciting and fun, and then I realize that I used a word that everybody's mad at, and I feel, geez, I just totally screwed it. Now I'm, instead of the best teacher, I'm the world's biggest whatever, right? So you constantly trying to develop that self, in line with a morality. He says you can't help but have a morality. It's kind of interesting that you can't deny that you're the one making the decision. Even if I say, God wants me to do this, I'm deciding to do what I think God wants me to do. Or if I don't think there's a God, I'm the one that's deciding that there is no God, so therefore anything is fine, right?
Both perspectives on
right.
reality presuppose free will.
Me being the one that's making the decision, right? But also I'm going through this dynamic interplay of forces within myself that's this ongoing stream of consciousness. Not only am I getting input from everything around me, but I'm aware of what I'm doing in my own head as I'm trying to make these decisions. Oh, there's a Snickers bar. Oh, no, I shouldn't eat a Snickers bar. They're bad for me. But I like Snickers bars. I think, no, don't. There's a dialogue going in my head, and who's going to win? Me, but which side of me, right? The pro-diet, anti-diet. Who's going to win? But one of them will dominate at the moment. But then I'll feel bad. I'll say, I ate the dang thing. I make sure that the next time I see one, I won't eat it. Yeah, right. Right? This constant dialogue is going on in my head between these two sides of me, which tradition we call the in itself and the for itself, right? But what's between them? There's a gap, Sartre says, because I am what I am not, and I'm not what I am. And so there's this gap between these two things, and they never come together. And what is it? Nothingness. There's nothing there. And nothingness is curled in the center of being like a worm. He's French. And it breaks the scientific chain of events because it's nothingness. And that's what enables me to be free. Because there's this nothingness coiled in the heart of being, which is the human self. That's this gap between what I am and what I think of as me, right? So I'm constantly this gap there, which is what introduces freedom into the world. And when I read that, I was like, yay!
Well, that in
Get
is
the flag.
atheism too, right?
Pardon?
That in is atheism, because there's no outside influence beyond the simple existence of man.
Well, he is an atheist.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I
that's part of his argument,
I
not?
avoided that. I think you could. Well, he points out that there are Christian existentialists.
But in his point of view is what I'm saying. From his point of view.
You're still responsible for what you do,
Right, right.
and you're still the one that has to make those decisions. as you go.
It changes the whole a priori as he sees it, because there's not any
Right.
pre-existing conscience of good that creates possible reasons for us to do that which we should think is right by an outside force influencing it. In other words, we now are our own creators of our own destiny based on our own decisions of this enswa and in itself. In just our freedom of just being free to do whatever we want. It's almost like a form of chaos. Cause there's no rules.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
He
you
uses
wonder,
Dostoevsky uses Dostoevsky's quote, right? I mean, so it's a, I guess, a form of chaos where if you have everybody in the world existentialist atheists, then you now have everybody doing whatever they want, right? Everybody's blowing
well,
red lights
okay,
and-
in come the fellow Communist Party, he was a communist, in come the fellow Communist Party, but you've got us, we're in a society together, and we all work together, so, you know, if you die, we'll continue on with the work, etc. And that's, you can't really take us completely out of that social network. As a pragmatist, Americans clearly will put this existential self in a social context where we don't really talk of ourselves as completely free. We have some free choice, but at the same time, you know, if you decide you're going to, you know, jump over this fence, your dad grabs you by the shoulder and says, "No, wait, we'll look tomorrow when we could see what's over the fence." And I'm glad I did that, because the next day we went to the fence and discovered that the caldera was down there, and my son would have been down there, a couple thousand feet. You know, I wouldn't have had him anymore. He's 40 now and making more money than me. You know, that would have all, you know, been gone if I didn't stop him. That was on the Big Island.
Wow.
However, is this fun? You guys having fun with this?
Why did he decline the Nobel Prize?
You know, I don't really remember his argument for that. A lot of folks have kind of done that to make like a political a point. I don't remember exactly what his thinking was on that.
I wonder if in a way it like made him sell more books. Like, he became more popular after that.
Well, that does, you know, if President Trump is offered the Nobel Prize, I doubt that he would refuse it. I think he's on the plane already. And I don't know, I don't think Sartre was rich, and so he probably could have used the $1 million. I would have at least gotten it in order to donate it to my favorite charities, my kids. That was a joke.
They are your favorite.
Actually, my wife donates a lot to things like elephants, and we've saved all the whales. Collected the whole set. So let's look at some. I didn't get very far, but we can. So who complained that existentialism is too gloomy? So yeah, I thought, you know, existentialism is really, especially Søren Kierkegaard's version of it, very gloomy. I mean, you know, the night of fear and trembling, when you realize that you are your own boss, you know, that you are the one that has to make decisions. He talks about the young man that comes to him for advice about whether he should join the forces in Britain or stay and take care of his mom when he's the only one left with that. I hope you kept reading through wondering, well, what's he going to do? He never does tell us, does he?
Yeah.
He does?
No, I was
No,
just
he doesn't.
agreeing.
Yeah,
Like,
he doesn't.
I remember like reading that. I'm like, okay, what's the conclusion? And it not happen. I'm like, oh, okay.
Mean of him to do that, wasn't it? And he had the choice. He could have told us, but he didn't. But you know, every part of that guy's trying to think what he wants to do. He's looking for an out. He doesn't want to be the responsible one for making the decision. But there's no escape. You're condemned to be free, and you're the one that's going to be responsible for your own choice, whatever you do, right? But it still struck me as gloomy. I'm trying to remember now why. But I felt it was depressing after a while. Initially, there was kind of an uplift when you realize you're in charge of things. But once you realize it's all your fault. Remember, he points out that not only are you responsible for your own decision, but you're actually making the decision for the world, right? So if you think it's a shame that the Amazon is on fire, and you feel like you ought to do something about it, well, you should actually do something. What can you do, right? But just sitting here and just bemoaning. Oh, by the way, that's the password for tonight. If you needed it,
Bemoaning?
bemoan.
That's great.
Sorry, anybody needed it. But you can't just sit here bemoaning. Oh, they're burning the Amazon. Our kids are not going to have any air to breathe, etc. You can always buy cans of air from Spaceballs, right? Sorry, that's a movie. At least one person is familiar with Spaceballs.
Spaceballs?
Spaceball?
Pizza the Hut. Hello, my baby. Hello, my baby. Mm.
Świeży воздух.
Свежий воздух is Russian for fresh air. I don't know why that popped in there. Did you see it was Perry Air?
Uh-huh.
Uh-huh.
At least it didn't say derriere.
Pardon?
At least it didn't say derriere.
Derriere?
At least it didn't say derriere.
Derriere. That's,
French.
whenever I go to the state fair,
Yeah.
I love to visit the barn with all the animals because I love the smell of that dairy air. That's a bad joke.
I get it though. I was just thinking derriere, like the French word.
Yes, we.
We.
Oh well. So existence comes before essence. This is really famous too. And there's a great joke that you maybe have heard before. Descartes says, now I'm gonna, wait, I've got it, I don't want to screw up the funny ending. So, okay, so Descartes says Descartes says do, then, no. He says one or the other. Be, then do. Sartre says do, then be. And the great American philosopher Frank Sinatra said do, be, do, be, do. I'm sure, let me find the right version of that.
I think Descartes would be do, then be.
one version of it. How's this one go? To be is to do is to be, doobie doobie do. Oh, well. But what's the deal, in any case? So what he tries to argue is that what I do, my essence, so I would say, okay, so what would you call my essence? Retired Army, philosophy teacher, husband, those my essence? But I had to exist first. Might you argue that, well, because I already have an essence as a human, that therefore I exist? He's arguing the opposite, that the essence of being a human is our doing stuff. So you have to first exist in an essence. So essence and existence, if we look at Plato, go way back to Plato, he's looking for the ideas of everything. And the ideas are the essences of everything, right? Then along comes Aristotle and says, no, everything has to have substance to exist. And so everything exists and then has essence, right? For a while, you end up with everyone Platonic. That's St. Augustine. Christianity earlier is based on Plato. So everything has essence, right? Then along comes Aristotle, reintroduced at the Renaissance into Europe. Really, the Crusades brought it back. And so you end up with everyone becoming an Aristotelian. They referred to Aristotle as the philosopher. And so, you look in the Summa of Aquinas, and they refer to the philosopher. Whenever you click on that, it's a reference to one of Aristotle's books, which I remember I showed you the list, right? So Aquinas is faced with this dilemma that Christianity is based on the idea that everything is spiritual. Along comes Aristotle, who says, no, everything has to have substance. So you end up having to merge those two things together in order for Christianity to accept Aristotle, and that's what Aquinas does. Makes the dogma of the church much more complex, which is one of the reasons why the Protestants rebelled against it, because it was so theologically complex. Martin Luther didn't like Aquinas, right? So there's a rebellion to stay to the old St. Augustinian view of physics, basically, right? The church, the Roman Catholic Church, on the other hand, accepted it and was into science, which of course led to many of its members discovering stuff that pissed everybody else off, right? Like Galileo and so on, right? They were members, they were teachers, they were good Catholics, but they also were doing science, right? And by doing that, which was open to them, they end up discovering stuff that was in conflict with a lot of the dogma, which, by the way, the Protestants still never quite accepted. Kansas, right? Sorry, evolution, Kansas, all that stuff. Yes.
I looked up Darwin, who it turns out, I thought he was Christian, but by the end of his, which he undoubtedly started out, but by the end of his life, there seems to be some controversy. Some think he's an atheist and others an agnostic. Daniel Dennett believes he's an agnostic.
Agnostic.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And of course.
Yeah, and Daniel Dennett is an interesting cookie too. He's the smartest of the there's so-called four horsemen, and he's clearly, in my mind, he's the most knowledgeable one. But he's much closer to what I think, even though he refers to himself as an atheist. There was an interview I probably wouldn't be able to find exactly the spot, but he was talking in an interview. It was supposed to be Charlie Rose, but it turned out to be Dan Rather at the time. Let's see. Ah. That's not the right one. Maybe if I go Charlie Rose.
Consciousness.
Okay, so this is part 106, breaking the spell. This is the whole thing, right? So go to this. Go to this. By the way, if you looked at the video that I posted, though, Daniel Dennett wore this. So that's why I wore this.
I like it. You look
I
nice.
just thought that.
T-shirt.
Usually I wear a tie, but he didn't, so.
Daniel Dennett is here, training triple life. Well, in that case, I believe in God, because I believe in evolution. And that is what
Okay.
change what you mean by God so much that it's just unrecognizable to somebody
That's
else.
in volume
That
left on
these
the
never
volume
really
bar.
go around and say, well, I still believe in God. I believe in democracy.
Utilize
Each of us,
potential.
you believe in God. No. Well, which God? I don't believe in the Old Testament God. I certainly don't believe in Yahweh. I don't believe in the God that created all creatures great and small. We have no need for a creator God to explain the evolution of the biosphere. Do I believe in Tillot's ground of all being?
I was gonna ask you that, what is the ground?
What is the ground? I don't know if I believe in it, if I knew what
The
it was.
unanswerable question.
Well, but
God is
maybe,
the unanswerable
but
question.
maybe you see, for some people, God is whatever it is that created all this wonderful life. Well, in that case, I believe in God because I believe in evolution.
So-
And that is what created all this.
So that's, I find very acceptable, actually.
Didn't hear what he said.
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We
So-
inhabit.
So basically, if God is that than which nothing greater can be thought, the creator of the entire universe, right? That's that line from
Yeah.
St. Anselm,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's, so if you find that's okay, right? I can accept that. Of course, actually. Of course. That must be the case, right? Because that's the only necessary being, right? By definition, right? So you don't pass your philosophy exam if you don't go with that, right? So of course that's if that's what you mean by God, I'm I agree, right? This is the spot, where I've heard him say that. Everywhere else in all of his books, he's says he's an atheist, etc. Right? Maybe an agnostic. An agnostic is someone that doesn't know, right? Atheist means there is no theist, no God, right? No theo, right? Of course, the problem with that is you'd have to prove that something doesn't exist. And you can't prove the negative, they say, right? So you can't prove that there isn't a bear in the woods. Actually, I think if you went over there with a infrared goggles or something, you'd look around and you'd find no. Well, it could be in a den already. I don't think so, but you could look and you could say no. There's no big animals in the forest.
Get your Oculus.
That wouldn't help. Because I'd be looking at the forest back when the satellite passed over and they added it up.
All past and future exist at the same time.
There are goggles that if you went to the museum when they had a couple of goggles in the atrium or where the fountain used to be that you could put on, and they would give you other stuff to see, but the goggles were clear so that you were still seeing the room. I've never seen those for sale anywhere, but I'm not sure what that would do. But so this is Daniel Dennett in this one particular scene where he acknowledges basically what I also feel myself, that you can't deny the ontological argument. That strikes me as a successful mathematical argument.
What if you change the words to, God is that which there is nothing more non-existent than? Is that problematic of existence?
You know, last week I never did mention Kant's argument against it. I mentioned that Kant had a critique. Kant's critique goes basically like this, to say that your conclusion, God exists, is actually the same as God is, except you don't complete the sentence. You say, God is what? And you don't say, right? So Kant's critique of that conclusion is that it's not a full sentence. It's not a real statement to say that God exists. You're basically just saying God is, and it's an incomplete phrase, basically. You know, the thing is, Hegel comes along and says, that's nonsense. You know, these glasses exist, these glasses don't. You know, so clearly there's no problem, you know, with existence being what they call a predicate, right? Yeah, it's a predicate, a complete predicate. So I find that persuasive. Also because it annoys the heck out of people.
Yes, it does.
That's just, you know, I don't know how much money philosophers have made over the centuries with that argument, you know, but it's clearly one of the most productive, you know, of all, as far as I know. But it leaves you totally, well, then what, right? It doesn't, because the minute you start trying to fill in other predicates, then you just get in arguments with everybody. Although, my favorite, and we'll cover him, is I say my favorite, and then I walk over here to type in his name, and I can't remember the name. You know, that's terrible when that happens. Human flourishing. Oh, here it is. Miroslav Volf. We will talk about him eventually in class. But I think I mentioned too that when we look at theologians of all the major religions, Islam, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, the more education in theology they get, the more they all come together in harmony, basically, and end up agreeing with one another on the purpose of religion, on the nature of God, and so on. And he wants a consortium of the major religions to come together and basically license people to teach religion, as a goal to stop all the frivolous religions that pop up all over the place, run by people that don't know what they're talking about. That was kind of interesting. He teaches at Yale, so I looked it up, and actually there have been world councils, and they are working towards that goal. You know, I can see that working in other countries more so than in the United States, where we're adamantly into separation of church and state. Remember, we have our state religion. It's kind of an official, hidden John Stuart Mill type religion.
In Alaska?
The entire U.S. We have holidays,
Yeah.
which is the same as Holy Day. It's even spelled the same, basically, except not. Well, H-O-L-I instead of L-Y. Right? Have days off, work. We argue over them. Like coming up soon, we're instead of Columbus Day, we're going to have
President's Day? I think it's
President's
President's
Day. I thought it was Native Indigenous
Yes,
Peoples
okay.
Day, which
What's
is
that
not
mean?
every state, but pardon?
What does indigenous mean?
Indigenous. That's fun. When in Latin, Indian means the people that lives up in a place. So, and apparently the first use of it came from the Indus River. So when the Romans got that far, they referred to the Indus and the Hindi, the Indi, right? So India basically was a Latin word meaning native. When Columbus discovered America, so-called, right, and he met the people there, he referred to them as the natives, Indiana, right? And ever since, everybody thought he was dumb. He thought he had found India, but actually, it seems he knew he wasn't in India. He thought he was pretty close, but he knew they were islands, etc. But he wasn't calling them Indiana, because they were in India. He was calling them that because that's the Latin name for natives. Which also explains why we have a state, Indiana. Well, obviously it's not part of India, etc. But indigenous is the same root. And I think the genus means like Genesis, right? So the beginning. So you beginning here, I guess. I'm creating all of this as I go. Yes? Good question, though.
I still don't know what it means.
Okay, so yeah, first
Oh,
inhabitant.
okay. The first people.
Well, the people that were here before Western colonization, which were
Okay.
predicated by people who were here thousands of years before that, which were predicated by people who were here before the land bridge, which were et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The people before us.
But not Adam and Eve.
Well, in a manner of speaking, Adam and Eve are here too. We're all part of Adam and Eve.
Well, definitely part Eve.
You know, you've heard of the mitochondrial Eve?
Uh-huh.
Yes? Mitochondrial Eve?
I've heard of it, but I don't remember.
We all have mitochondria, and our mitochondria is all the same genetic background. So they all all of our mitochondria came from the same woman at some point. And they refer to her as mitochondrial Eve. And at least the males among us that have a Y chromosome it's the same Y chromosome, although it deteriorates. That was something I read in The Iceman, the book about the guy that they found in Switzerland. Actually, they thought it was Italy. But it
Wasn't
turned
he also the first recorded murder?
Yes.
Yeah. Somebody shot him in the back.
Well, he was an escaping thief, I think. So it was, hey, you steal from people, you're going to get shot. They did a study of his chromosome, and the biologist that did it and wrote the book, The Iceman, discovered that he had the exact same Y chromosome as his neighbor in London. Which is, so you could trace the Y chromosome. It goes all down the male line. And so there's an Adam. The thing that he mentioned, though, in the book was that when you figure out where Adam came from and where Eve came from, they were at least 1,000 or 2,000 years apart. Just kind of screws up the garden thing.
Long, lonely garden.
Maybe we didn't age the same.
But I'm 1.2% Neanderthal,
Impressive.
so I'm like, yes. So now whenever I see that Geico commercial where the poor caveman is all upset because even a caveman can do it, I'm like,
Something like 11% of the population that still has Neanderthal genes. It's not much.
and here's what you would look like if, let's see if I can.
Yes, I wouldn't see it.
I was
And
hoping you were
freckles?
gonna, I was hoping you were gonna draw it.
Something like homunculus.
This is the one that I. Where'd he go? There he is.
Oh God, is that Keratin?
Pardon?
Sad.
Red hair, freckles. Those are Neanderthal traits, apparently. And the Caucasian. So, if you think about it, as the people came from Africa and came up through the Middle East and then started merging with the Neanderthals, the intermixture is where the Caucasian people, right, they all live in Northern Europe. So if you think about it, that's kind of intriguing.
This may be a dumb question, but like with albinos today, was there ever?
That's, I think, a genetic, what's it called? There's not very many of them. Begins with an R. I can't
Progressive.
Recessive.
It's recessive, but it's also kind of a, I don't want to call it a mistake.
Mutation.
Mutation, thank you. They usually, though, make the albinos nasty characters, though, don't they, in movies? That's mean. I don't know. Well, am I boring you guys to death, or is this fun? I need another quiz question, though. And I had one, but I forgot it. What was it? Should be on. I'll think of something. What was it? Shoot.
I was having trouble with this chapter until we got to page 373 and mentioned like the negative portrait for like your hopes and aspirations. Second paragraph from the bottom.
On 370?
373.
373.
This begins in the middle there. It's,
But in reality, and for the existentialist, there is no love apart from the deeds of love.
on the other hand, it puts everyone in a position to understand that reality alone is reliable. That dreams, expectations, and hopes serve to define a man only as deceptive dreams, abortive hopes, expectations unfulfilled. That is to say, they define him negatively, not positively. So I took that to mean like if you look at a silhouette,
Mm-hmm.
the only thing that's defined is what the silhouette isn't, but you get the shape.
Yeah. When this goes back to Hegel too, is Hegel introduces what is kind of a peculiar European way of using language. Very important, and it's clearly a progress, an advance, a recognition that when you call something like this is a book, we all agree, and we could use that, and so on. But in other contexts, it's not a book. And in fact, all those other contexts include the thing itself. It is all of its characteristics, not just the ones that we want to think about, right? Hegel has a great line that says, "The truth is the whole." I should put that up here because it's really famous. The truth is the whole. Well, we don't want to go to the whole phenomenology, but so the truth is the whole. And so what does he mean by that? That in our models that Stephen Hawking talks about, when we talk about model-dependent realism, remember we've got the model that says the Earth goes around the sun, we've got the model that says the sun goes around the Earth, we've got the model that says the whole shebang is going around the galactic center, we've got the model that says nothing's moving, because all of time exists in space, etc. So we've got all these different models. They're all true. And many other models that we've never even thought of yet, because the truth is the whole. And all of our conceptual schemas that we use to think, because that's the only way we can think, is in conceptual schemas, all of those are kind of symbolic systems in our head, part of what we have created as human beings together as a society, but they're all conceptions that exist kind of like the virtual reality games. I mean, you could, in games today, you can go and create whole other worlds. I'm thinking of that movie, what was the name of that movie where a lot of the action was in virtual reality in other worlds. What was Ready Player One. So in Ready Player One, the universe is there's all sorts of inhabitable worlds all over the place. Although it's a fraud, because everybody is really just in their mobile home, in their slum, with their goggles on the internet, visiting these virtual worlds that don't really exist.
The same thing with Avatar.
Right. Well, in the movie, they were supposed to be a real other planet, but you're right. That was totally fictitious. But in a sense, all these conceptual schemas that we create are just in a way like that. They're in our heads, and they're not the real world. But in a sense, we can't really conceive of the real world. The real world doesn't have any of those models. It's just the facticity of nature as it is in itself, apart from our thinking about it. And in fact, I'm creating that as a schema. So even that isn't real nature. I mean, that's why Sartre is saying we're stuck. You can't get outside of being human. David Chalmers, you can't get outside of the stream of consciousness that you're experiencing. And the stream of consciousness is a human stream of consciousness with all of our perceptions and our thoughts and all that sort of thing. That's all part of it. So when Hegel says the truth is the whole, he's talking about outside of all of these models, all of the things, including all of the models that we make and will make that are true, right, is the whole truth, right? That's what's out there, right? And remember, for Sartre, as you're doing this dialogue with yourself, your whole real self is the dialogue between both parts of you, right? So it's not like you are the in itself, or no, you're the for itself. You're the dialogue between the two of them constantly. So you are both of them together, right? There's a spot where Hegel talks about the phenomenology. I guess I could, I don't want to go through the whole thing, but it's very dynamic. It's really fun literature to see the way he describes it. Drives people crazy because they don't know what the heck he's doing, unless you're lucky and have someone who's culturally aware of how to interpret what he's doing, to say, hey, this is what's going on, right? If you just read it straight, you're like, what? What the heck is going on here, right? Was that an answer to a question? I like this stuff. I don't know if you do. you will be heroes all your lives, eating and drinking heroically. It was a question, you did ask about. So the negative aspect of it is part of the whole picture,
Oh, okay, yeah, so I guess
right?
that, then I interpreted it wrong. Because what I was interpreting is, that.
There
Sark
can be
meant
no
that
wrong
only-
interpretation, just different ones, right?
So the interpretation, the understanding I had from reading was the Sark was referring to, existence and essence as, existence first and essence through action and experience. So the things you do, and that defining yourself by the things you do is the only accurate way, because if you define yourself by the things you think, the things you hope for, the things that have not yet come to pass, your goals, your dreams, your aspirations, you haven't done them. So they don't represent who you are. And therefore, they define you in the negative, like the foreground and the background of a silhouette. Those are the things you are not yet, or may never be. That's what I thought you were saying.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. But I mean, it's even, I would explore even more and say that, you know, part of you is that you are not from Indiana, right? You're not, right?
That's one way to define it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you're all the things that you're not. Well, I mean, you're not those things, but all the things that you're not is part of, it would be a waste of time. We wouldn't say, okay, so you're not Christmas tree tinsel, you're not a pine tree, you're not a amoeba. You know, we don't, that would be just dumb, you know, to go through all the things that you're not. But in a sense, that's part of who you are, that you are not all those things.
Sounds like an infinite dichotomous key.
Oh,
Dichotomous key
yeah.
isn't helpful unless you get to the definition. If the definition is your actions, then why not skip to your actions? But I mean, that doesn't mean I agree wholeheartedly. Like, I feel like your concept, that dialogue, the forswa, the inswa, the things that you aspire to, the goals, the wishes, the hopes, the dreams, do still affect the actions.
Right,
There's
right,
a relationship, and therefore there is value in the causality. And if you take that to the metacognition of the self, and talking about free will and how the subconscious and the body is making decisions, and how we're still trying to figure out how much of those decisions are affected in the moment by consciousness, or whether it was the previous moment's consciousness. And it seems like all of that tracks. Those things that you think go into the subconscious, and they sit there, and they inform the next decision that's made, that you then consciously become aware of and think about in the meta, which informs the subconscious for the next decision you make. So you have an indirect free will.
constant dialogue
Right.
with all these, and can we even keep track of all of it? It's
A
neat to see the
self-interpretation.
machines that start measuring all of this brain activity and trying to make sense of what's going on. That's so new, and it's advanced so rapidly. It doesn't seem like it's going to be that long before we're going to have, you know, mental maps to say this guy's a terrorist, you know, just by doing a brain scan. You won't have to ask him questions. Just put him in a fMRI or whatever and run the scanner and say, oh, terrorist. You know, it could even just like a little red light, you know, go off. You know, that could happen, theoretically. I know that they can scan someone to say that the lie area, that you have an area in the brain that lights up when you're going to lie. I'm getting ready to lie now. Bing! You know, a little light goes on. You know.
Have you seen that movie? It's with Tom Cruise. It's-
Minority Report.
Yeah. You know, where they try to catch it
Ugh,
before it happens.
I just don't like the concept of living in a time where they rip your eyeballs out and put new ones in so that you can have a new ID. Ugh.
Oh, is that how they did it?
Did you see the movie?
Yeah. But I don't remember eyeballs being ripped out. It's
I
been
like
a long
these because
time.
they're complications to this argument of free will. I like that it adds nuance. Like the gunman in the bell tower who professes that he's having angry thoughts and he's violent and he's not himself, and he writes letters and then he becomes more and more dangerous and no one helps him. He cries for help. He goes up in the bell tower and shoots 20-some people. Is he accountable for his actions when they kill him and then dissect his brain and realize that there was a tumor that was causing those things? Is that still free will? Is he still accountable? It's an interesting discussion.
Well, he died, right?
Yeah.
So we won't go to trial to find out. But that's gonna happen someday. And that's how we as a community are gonna make those decisions. We're gonna sit there and we're gonna have a jury of his peer group, you know?
Other people with brain tumors.
No, we probably won't. We'll define them right out of his peer group. We want people that will show up.
Oh.
Yes.
I don't think you
I
ever
still-
said the second.
I never did. I never did. It should be something, And I had a really good one too. Now I can't remember. Anybody got a good free will? I feel forced to ask you a question, but I don't have one. Shoot. If a guy says something and there's no woman there to hear it, is he still wrong? That's a pretty dumb question, isn't it? That's just a joke. Well, you gave us a perfect question. Was the gunman in the tower in what university was it?
Can't remember. Google it.
We could. We don't need to know that, though. Was that gunman who had a tumor in his brain, was he using his free will when he shot those 20-some people?
That was the Texas one,
Yeah. Excellent question. There's a movie.
Really?
One that was even worse was the one in the hotel in Las Vegas just,
Yeah.
is that 2 years ago now? He shot, what, 80-some people?
$800 million settlement, MGM. Huh?
$800 million.
Was the
not
se-
the MGM, but the Mandala Bay.
Yes, but
The hotel.
did MGM own the,
Oh, I don't know about
Yeah,
that.
I think they own it. Yeah, they own that.
that casino was full of sharks.
Good thing they didn't have a tornado.
Good class?
I'm just really tired.
It's Friday evening. Why on earth would anyone do this to themselves?
Because they want to graduate.
If I ever had one.
That's right. Or they.
So, I've got a question.
Yes.
If
say I haven't started doing any work yet, would it be possible for me to come back?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Email me all the, you could, as long as you get it all in before the end of the
Okay, I was
semester,
just making
yes.
sure. Thanks.
Yes.
Have a good one.
In fact, I think I just automatically gave everybody an A because, well, the way I do things doesn't, for the midterm grade, I was supposed to do that. So I put in an A for everyone because you're gonna have one. Just send it in.
Okay.
Catch up.
I just have a question about the Wolf guy, the flourishing book.
Which
The
one?
flourishing book that you said?
Flourishing, Miroslav Volf.
Yeah. Do you know like the religious orientation of that guy?
Episcopalian.
Okay. Because it's like the exact opposite of the book I'm reading for Sam Harris, The End of Faith,
Oh,
right now.
oh,
So
oh, yeah. Well, Sam is wrong.
it just sounded really interesting, so I want to read that one too. Because I'm really
Yeah,
enjoying Sam's book because it's pretty funny so far. But
Oh, he is good. I enjoy him, but
You watch his Waking Up podcast?
no, I haven't.